And it's time for us to move on to the next agenda point. And the topic now is going to be security and trust. So I'm very happy to invite Rebecka Ångström, who is the principal researcher of Ericsson Research and affiliated research fellow at the House of Innovation at Stockholm School of Economics. And she will be joined by our very own Mauricio Muñoz, who is the senior research engineer here at AI Sweden. So welcome to the both of you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Wonderful to have you here. So we're going to kind of tag along on this agent topic, but give it the perspective of trust and security, because we see that as such important topics going forward, and something that I think a lot of people are thinking about. So now we see that with agents becoming implemented, the most common thing might not be humans talking to AI, but in the moderate to long run will be AIs talking to AI, just as Magnus showed us. So what do you think that's going to entail for our trust in systems?
Can I
Rebecka,
start?
go ahead, yes.
Well, I think that even if we don't see the system or the AI or the agent behind, still trust will be such a key important thing to make this work in an organization. Because we have people who will be reliant on the results of these systems or the processes that they perform or the tasks that they perform. So in a sense, if you have the scientist in the AstraZeneca case, that scientist will still need to trust the output of that whole system. And I don't see that this is going to go away. If we don't build trust for these kind of agents that we put in use, we are instead going to see a lot of rejection and disuse of these systems, which will just stall the whole implementation phase.
Yes. So what factors do you think are important then to build trust, Rebecka?
So when you're looking at the factor for trustworthiness in humans or in teams and in organizations, they're usually the three ones. It's the ability, that is the skill and the competences of the team or the person or the organization. It's the integrity, that you abide by the same kind of principle of values. And then you have the benevolence, that, that I want to do you good. For AI system, it's a little bit different. Usually we talk about functionality, reliability, and helpfulness, but it can also be transparency. And it also depends a lot on which task. What we're looking now into research is more also understanding that for building this kind of trust towards AI systems or agents, you need to also understand the social context, because it's a social technical aspect to this. So what is happening around you in the organization? What are your managers saying? What is the developer behind this and the supplier behind this? So there's a lot of different factors that impacts trust in AI.
Yes, and I think that is a very interesting topic, because that kind of leads me to think, do we consider flaws in machine and AI differently than flaws in humans? I don't know if you have a comment on that, Daniel.
Yeah, well, absolutely, we do. I think that, at least in my experience applying some of these technologies over the last 20-25 years, in many situations we have a much stronger demand on precision and exactness and correctness in these methods, basically. But sometimes when we're working with these types of generative models and things like that, we might have to let that go a little bit. But I do think that some of the transparency is actually quite important, to actually be able to see what these agents are talking about, so that we can understand what's going on in the system, etc., etc. Such small things might actually build trust, even if things go wrong, you can see why they go wrong and why they do things that they do. So there are ways around it.
Yeah, but the question is then, when we have a lot of agentic system talking to each other, will we actually have that transparency? Will we, maintain the overview? And do we even actually need to? I kind of want to invite you, Mauricio, to the conversation for that one.
Yeah, sure. So I think, to be honest, we've never really had total insight about sort of like what's going on inside of these models. I really don't expect that to change. I think the best that we can do is to figure out where the limitations are as the systems keep getting more and more complex. And I think what's critical about this point is that those limitations might not be the limitations that we think the models have. And I think one sort of aspect that underpins a lot of the discussion at the moment, and a lot of my thinking in particular, is a very specific application of something that's known here as Moravec's paradox, which is what we see when we sort of interact with these systems, for example, LLMs, that they can do very complex tasks, right? And this is, for example, what drives a lot of the investment and a lot of the discussion. But at the same time, what's also quite predictable is that there are very many cases in which they will fail, where it's about very simple logic, right? It's about common sense, and they're unable to sort of deal with this. And so I think this is something that drives a little bit this discussion also about trust, is that with the human, typically, if you can execute a more complex task, you would assume that they can also execute simpler tasks, but that simply doesn't apply to AI systems. And I think that's at the root of what sort of underpins a lot of the mistrust, I guess, that we as a society currently have in these systems.
And I want to kind of volley that back to you, Rebecka, about the distrust. Do you think it's actually necessary for us to have a bit of distrust, or is it a hindrance to value creation?
No, I actually think that distrust is necessary. And I just love the example that Mauricio is bringing up. I think when the LLMs were new, the ChatGPT and such, when you ask them to just do 2 + 2, well, it can predict that, it's most likely to come a 4 after that. But if you do ask it to raise 2 by 22, then, it gives you something completely gibberish. And people don't really make that difference, that this model can do A, but maybe not B. And when it comes in terms of trust, I think it's and distrust is quite interesting to connect this, because if we don't have that distrust, actually questioning the model, whether or not it's able to do that, it has the ability. If we only have trust, we are at the risk of coming into a situation where you have over-reliance to a system, when you start using it in a faulty way, or you expect too much, and it starts making problem for you. And the interesting part about trust and distrust is actually it's not the same construct. It's not that if you don't have trust, you automatically get distrust. It's actually activating different parts of the brain. So what we're seeing is that they coexist, trust and distrust. So if you have the right balance of trust, you will see people start using the system. But at the same time, nurture a little bit of distrust at the same time. So you question some of the results and question some of the tasks that you decide or you want to try to use it for. So you don't just rush into it and have this kind of over-reliance to a system. So a little bit of distrust is always good to have.
Oh, that actually makes a lot of sense, because then distrust isn't actually the thing that prevents you from taking action and using it. That's a whole different question, but distrust is a healthy part. I learned something new from that. But I think many of you have seen Sweden being in the media a lot for having actually lower trust in AI systems and more like tend to focus on risk compared to many other countries. So do you think, that has an impact on how organizations behave, on how we treat AI, when there's a difference between countries of how we see AI? I'm going to hand that to Mauricio.
Yeah, I mean, I think the perception is certainly one thing. I think we'd have to double check the data, what that actually says in terms of adoption and what the perceived risks are and how people sort of like navigate that uncertainty. I think we would have to take a look very specifically at that data to see what's really going on. But the perception, I would say, is that you have, of course, as in every other technology wave, you have early adopters as well as you have laggards, right? And this is no different. So I think there are, particularly in the West, right? I think we've adopted this attitude towards AI with sort of like this over cautiousness. This is something that, for example, we don't see that much in cultures like Japan, right? I mean, culturally speaking, especially in terms of robotics and robotics applications in society, I think they're on a completely different perspective, have a completely different perspective than we do. So I think it's quite interesting to observe that there definitely are cultural differences, and this basically informs the bias that we have as humans towards these technologies. And we can't simply ignore this as we consider how do we increase trust, or how do we want to increase trust, and how do we want to increase adoption. We need to basically have that self-awareness in order to be able to navigate the uncertainty, right, that arises from, for example, this Moravec's paradox that I mentioned, right, of how do we sort of put these technologies in relation to, for example, how humans think, right? The fact that we really can't map it one-to-one is a lot of the cause of that uncertainty, and we need to somehow be very cautious and conscious of that uncertainty to be able to really adopt AI at scale in society, I think.
I'm going to hand that over to you because I believe you might have a comment as well, Rebecka.
Yeah, so, well, trust and distrust towards AI is found around the globe. We did one study looking into AI implementation a couple of years ago, and one of the major challenges for implementing AI in organization is actually the cultural aspects, where people were worried about losing their job, worried that their expertise would become out of date, also worried that they would be less in control. And we saw that in that study. We did that in China, India, Germany, UK, and the US. And that kind of worries was present in all the different markets. In a more recent study we just did at Consumer and Industry Lab, we were looking into different AI scenarios in 2030, 2035, and we were targeting early adopters around the world. And this was people who have already started using virtual reality, augmented reality, generative AI on at least at a weekly basis. So they were quite advanced for that time. It's half a year ago, I think. And what we saw there is amongst this group of early adopters, you tend to believe that you will have only tech optimists, that they're super excited about the future and really looking forward to everything. Well, that was the majority of the sample. Around 50% of that early adopters were super excited about these different futures. But there was a large group, around 30%, of the sample that was also quite worried, had fear, and even experienced anxiety about this future. And they were early adopters too. And we found them in Japan, we found them in India, in the US, in Europe. So that is also something that is present, even among early adopters around the world.
So the skepticism, again, not a hindrance to action. I think that for me is a takeaway for sure. I want to spend our last few minutes focusing a little bit more on safety when it comes to AI, and especially on this agentic future we see in front of us. And Mauricio, I was wondering, like, with this, when agents become commonplace, let's say in the coming 1 or 2 years, what do you see, what do you expect from that, from a safety perspective?
Well, definitely I see this problem getting more difficult in the sense that, of course, the attack surface for these systems becomes exponentially larger, right? So if you basically go from taking an isolated AI, right, which basically at the moment just talks to humans in a sense, for example, just a standard LLM that you might be familiar using, to, like you said before, right, AIs that start talking to other AIs, right, rather than just to quote unquote dumb or deterministic tools, then the attack surface for these systems becomes exponentially larger, and that's of course a concern. I think it will be much more of a speed game in the future. It's really going to be much more of an arms race between the attackers and defenders. Essentially, you want to fight fire with fire. So as soon as you have your first AI bot there that is explicitly trained on penetration testing for to get past firewalls and things like that, then you're basically, this forces the defenders to also use something similar, right? And so you have this race that goes on. And so I kind of see that in the relatively near future. I think we're going to have to basically start to tackle the problems that arise from the scale of this idea and this concept. Maybe less so the creativity or the novelty of the attacks, although this might change rather quickly. Perhaps Daniel actually could also comment there in the future, how he sees this developing, right? But I think in terms of what we can do, and in particular the defense mechanisms that we can employ, I think it's quite clear that in industry, you certainly have this siloing effect, right, on the defense side, as in, like, if you want to if you want to train an AI on defenses in the cybersecurity world, you of course don't want to let all the world know of how your particular company has been attacked and where the weak points are. But at some point, this information becomes siloed, and we can't sort of like jointly learn from this. So this, I think, it really motivates the topics.
I'm gonna have to cut you off there because our time is running out. This section.
No worries.
Thank you very much, Mauricio. Any last 10-second comment for that?
No, I think Mauricio is completely right, and I think we're going to see within the security sector a huge push to more and more full automation, because we need that to cut down the time, and we're going to use AI to fight AI. That's the only option we have, basically.
Yes. So thank you very much, Rebecka and Mauricio. Happy to have you joined our conversation.